I think everybody can
can.
code switch and style shift, but not everybody can code switch to standard American English. Not everyone can pass as white. And so this is a problem because, like you said earlier, people are pretty good at identifying the race of an American English speaker, whether they're white or black, based on their voice alone. And it's not even just like with intonation. There have been studies, like very controlled studies, where you get someone to read a bunch of numbers and you can tell the ethnicity of the person. Sometimes they played a clip of just a single vowel sound and you can still tell, which is pretty crazy. And it's nothing to do with like skull shape or anything like the phrenology stuff. Like, it really is like, because any black person can sound perfectly, perfectly white. And I'm using terms that are maybe not the best way, but anybody who's born black can sound white if, like we see this in children that are adopted into white homes. So like it's nothing to do with biology that makes them sound that way. It's something that's much more, there's more agentivity going on there. Anyway, but some people don't have full command of standard American English and can't necessarily pass as white, just as I could never pass as black because I have no command of Afro-American English. And so this is a problem if you get someone who is racist and here's someone who sounds black, they're going to impose their racist attitudes on them. So this was a study done by John Baugh in the late 90s. John Baugh is a fascinating linguist for many ways, but one of the ways is that he's natively tri-dialectal. So he is Afro-American, but he grew up in Philadelphia for some of his life and like Southern California for some of his life. And so he is a native speaker of standard American English, what he calls his professional voice. He's a native speaker of Afro-American English, and then he's also a native speaker of Chicano English. And so being tri-dialectal is really interesting for him. And because he has full command of his three varieties of English, he can switch to his professional voice anytime that he wants. And so if he needs to, for example, call someone, he often switches to his professional sounding voice if he doesn't know the person that he's talking to. What he noticed when he moved to California is when he would call people, and he noticed that if he sounded black, he was often denied the opportunity to tour a home, like an apartment. And so he thought, I think there's some systemic racism going on here. So he conducted a study. He went through the newspaper, because that's how it was done in the 1990s, and he found, I think, something like 215 or 250 vacancies for apartments. So he cold called them, and the first time he called them, he tossed a coin to decide whether he was going to sound black or sound Chicano. And he would call them and say the exact same thing. It was something like, "Hi, I'm calling about the apartment that you have listed in the paper." And people would say, "Oh yes, it's open. Do you want to come by and schedule a tour?" Or they would say, "Oh no, it's actually been filled." So if it was the case that people said no, or no, it's been filled, he would wait 15 minutes, use his other non-standard accent, and call and say the exact same thing. And so if he sounded Chicano at first, then he sounded black. And sometimes he was told no a second time. He would wait 15 minutes, call back in his professional voice, and suddenly that apartment became very available to him. And so he's like, oh, this is really interesting. So he did this for about 215 or so apartments, and he found that there are some parts of California where if you called and sounded not white, you were denied the opportunity to tour that house much more than other white sounding people were. So he's like, this is a bad thing, because he's like, I'm fortunate because I can switch to my professional sounding voice, and so I don't have to overcome this. But some people don't have the opportunity or don't have the linguistic repertoire to switch into their standard sounding voice. And so they have to call someone sounding black. And if that person doesn't want to offer housing to someone who sounds black, then they're not going to do it. And so that person is going to be denied housing. And that's like just flat out racism. And so because of John Baugh's research, now like housing discrimination is a thing that people are aware of. And there are now laws that are passed saying you can't do that. So this is this is one of the cases where sociolinguistic research like very clearly has uncovered an aspect of people's lives that are affected by the way they talk, and sociolinguists did something about it, and now the world is a little bit of a better place because people, in theory, aren't discriminated against because of the way they speak.
Yeah. What a fascinating study. Fascinating study.
It is fascinating. He's super cool.
So what now? I think that African American English is becoming more accepted. Would you say that?
In some cases, I don't think it would be super appropriate to hear it in really formal settings. But I mean, I'm not into hip hop at all, but my understanding is that hip hop is very closely tied to African American English, that they use a lot of constructions from African American English, like grammatical and pronunciation things in hip hop and hip hop culture. And so for people that are not Black who want to, who like that kind of music and that lifestyle and culture, they also will start to adopt some of those features. And so it's very often the case that people who are into hip hop start to adopt features of African American because it's seen as a cool thing. And so in that sense, yes, it's not seen as stigmatized all the time. But imagine a white person going to school and sounding like they do when they're doing hip hop or things like that. Like the teacher would still be pretty upset about it and would tell them, why are you talking that way? So there is sort of this grassroots level,
Mm.
what do you call it, prestige going on, where if you're into hip hop, you kind of need to sound this way. You need to adopt these features of African American English. But people understand that that's only confined to certain contexts. And there are still many other situations where it would not be appropriate, or people see it as not appropriate to use features of African American English.
Speaking of school, tell us about the Ebonics controversy. About that.
So this was, I think, January of 1997. So this was another sort of late 90s thing. So this was Oakland school district in California. I think over half of their students were Black, and they noticed that a large portion of their Black students were in things like special ed and needed help in various ways. They noticed that, so they had a lot of children who spoke Spanish at home in their school district, and those students were getting the help that they needed. So they offered bilingual education and things like that because the students couldn't succeed in standard American English, and everyone recognizes that, and so they offer things, support for them so that they can succeed in school. Well, the Oakland School Board was like, you know what? We kind of see the same barriers for the African American children that we have in our school. Maybe we can propose that we have some sort of help, maybe similar in style or similar in theory to what the Spanish speaking children have, so that our African American English speaking children can have a little more success in school. The term they used at the time was Ebonics, so that we don't really use that term nowadays, actually, because of that controversy. So that kind of killed that word.
Wow.
But that's the term that they use for what is now called African American English or African American Vernacular English or African American language. So they put together a resolution that says, hey, we think that it would be helpful for our students to have some measures in place to help them succeed in school. And some of the things we would like to do is acknowledge that they speak a little bit differently from their white peers, and maybe offer some support to help bridge the gap between what the way they speak at home compared to the way that we expect them to speak at school.
Right.
So they put together this resolution. They had no idea how much the public would not like it. It was not really an internal memo, but it was not something that they intended for the world to see.
Sure.
Well, the world saw it, and people did not like it at all. There were some things that maybe could have been phrased a little bit differently, but the country really misinterpreted what was going on there. They saw it as, we declare Ebonics as a separate language. We do this so that we can get more government funding, so that we can offer bilingual education. We will train our teachers to teach math and English and science in Ebonics. We will teach your white children Ebonics. These are things that people interpreted it as, and none of those were true. And really, in reality, what they wanted to have done is, we want to acknowledge to students, hey, you speak a little bit differently at home. Here's how we expect you to speak at school. Let's point out the systematic differences between them, and that we can help you bridge the gap.
Yeah.
But people didn't like that, and so it was a national frenzy for like through end of December or early January, 96 to 97. And lots of people chimed in with their own thoughts about what was going on. The President of the United States at the time had opinions. Lots of people have thoughts about this, and they have people are entitled to their thoughts. But what this really uncovered, this is stuff that Walt Wolfram, a linguist at North Carolina State, talked about, is that it really uncovered language ideologies and language biases that people have.
Yeah.
People because we all speak a language, we all feel qualified to talk about language, even though that's not true. Like, just because I have eyes doesn't mean I'm qualified to do eye surgery. But people have thoughts about language, and there's this idea that the ideologies that they have are just common sense. So ideologies like there is a standard, and that standard is correct, and other things are wrong, and people should be speaking this standard. And those are so ingrained in people as common sense that they assume that any reasonable person would have those same thoughts. And if you don't have those same thoughts, then you're just crazy, and there's something wrong with you. Just as if someone says, I don't know, what kind of like idea, like murder is not a bad thing. Like, it's like, okay, that's a weird thing. We all acknowledge that that's a thing.
Right.
People equate language to not to murder, but like maybe that's wasn't the best example. But people just have these thoughts about language, and they assume that everybody should have these thoughts. And so when the Oakland School Board says, "Hey, maybe it's a good thing to acknowledge that people sound differently," people are like, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Why in the world would we do that?
Right.
I think people sound that way because they're just too dumb, or they're aiming for standard, but they're just they miss the mark because of whatever dysfunction they have in their life. And so why should we acknowledge this disability that they have? We should just hammer in the standard to them. And so there's a whole like Senate hearing. Like it went all the way to the Senate. They brought in linguists, because most linguists actually defended the Oakland School Board. They said, look, this is backed up by lots of research. It's been done in other countries. This is a thing that works. And then they brought in people that are just like have opinions, like a columnist and a preacher, who are like, well, I'm black and I don't sound that way, and so they should also not sound that way, because, and it's like, well, you have a lot of privilege in your life and you have a lot of opportunities to sound the way you do. These children don't.
Right.
And so, but it's just crazy to me to think that a columnist and a preacher were seen as equal in standard as far as qualifications to talk about this to the Senate as linguists who study African American English.
Right.
And people thought, it was like, yeah, that I don't see what's wrong with this. Like this preacher knows what he's talking about. I think we see this a lot more nowadays about pretty much any topic. People just sort of don't trust what academics and science says. I'm just going to do my own research and stuff. So I think we see this a lot more nowadays. But this was one that was really poignant because poignant to linguists, because we were on the bad side. We were on the side that society didn't like.
Yeah.
And it was just so close to home to us because this is literally what we study. So anyway, that's the Oakland Ebonics controversy in a nutshell, probably a very large nutshell.
A very large nutshell. I'm gonna make I'm gonna make a clip on this. Is like linguist has a meltdown over linguistic ideology. This kid. Well,
it is a really fascinating like thing that happened, like a national phenomenon, like something that really, like you said, like the school board did not anticipate this creating the waves that it did.
Yeah.
In a way, it's kind of insulting to linguists themselves, because they imagine you're a heart surgeon, and then you're listening to an opinion of a guy who's like, I don't know, chiropractor. No offense to chiropractors, but like the guy's like
Totally different.
just totally different.
Yeah.
Just totally different. It's like I'm a surgeon. I do surgery, and you don't. Yeah. So it's kind of like that.
Right.
Next.
I mean, we see it a lot nowadays with anything having to do with things like vaccines and climate change and lots of things. Scientists are all weighing in and saying definitively all the same thing, and then you get these people who think they know what they're doing that say other things, and for like, oh, that's actually a pretty good point that they're making. All the scientists are pulling out their hair. It's like, I literally am the expert on this, and no one is listening to me. So this is not a new thing. This is a thing that has become so mainstream that we don't even like think about it too much anymore. But this was something that was maybe one of the earlier cases in American English or in American culture, and it just has to do with language. And so linguists really like to talk about it.
Yeah.